So we've got a sample boat cover here, and this is a boat cover project. What we're seeing here is about half of a boat that has been recorded digitally with either a ProLiner device or a laser device. It's actually got points on it looks like about half the boat. What I'm going to do first is, and we're in Rhino, and so we've got a top view, a perspective, a front, and a right view. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top view. And because this is taken on a boat that was probably on a trailer or located that was somewhere potentially off the water, we're actually seeing that the front of the boat is lined up towards the top of the screen. The very first thing I'd like to do is first make sure that all the points are off, and it looks like this has some additional points that were the measured points taken here. So I'm turning all the points on, or layers on, so that I have all the data. I'm going to select all of the information in Rhino, and I'm going to use something called Rotate 2D. So I'm going to left click on that. I'm going to grab the top point up here, and I'm going to grab a point right here about the midpoint. It looks like we've got, I want to make sure my nearest shut off. I want to grab actually that point. So I'm going to make sure that on my O snaps, I'm going to make sure point is on. I'll grab that point, and I'll also turn on ortho. And what that's going to allow me to do is to rotate the boat. And I'm going to rotate it so that the front of the boat is here. And what that allows me to do here now is, if I zoom extents on all screens, the front is going to be looking like I'm at the front. The sides are going to be here. What I'm also going to do is in the right view now, I'm going to grab all the boat. I'm going to click on rotate again. And from a right view, I'm actually going to rotate this information so that I'm ortho. So what I've done here is I've rotated the boat so that from a front view or top view, I've got the center line of the boat straight up and down. Also, from the right view, I've rotated some of the lines so that I'm more actually looking at a boat like from the right side. Okay. So with that being done, I'm going to go to the top view again. And all of this is happening in Rhino right now. So I've got half of the boat recorded. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select the whole boat. I'm going to go ahead now and shut those measure points off and select it. And I'm going to use the Rhino mirror command. I'm going to mirror, and I'm going to grab a point up here at the front of the bow, and I'm going to grab the farthest most point. So I believe that's going to be right about here. And I'm going to mirror this boat to about that center point that we used before. Now, this shows me, I see a couple of crosses here in this point, but if I mirror to about the middle of that T-top that's coming off, I think that's a really good approximation of where the center of this boat comes. This the center line typically should be right down the middle, but it seems to vary a little bit on this boat. I think that actually is a really close, pretty accurate spot. If I take a look at the this in perspective view, I can see that you know what, it looks pretty close, and I think the T-top's really good here. Okay, now that I have a wireframe element, or I've got the boat mirrored, the one thing I've got is I got a lot of points on here. So I'm going to use something in Rhino called SELPT. SE, make sure I'm in a command line, PT, select points, so every point on the screen is selected. I'm going to just type hide, and what that does, that doesn't get rid of the points, it just cleans them up, it hides them a little bit. The next thing I'm going to do is over on my layers tool, I'm going to right click on layers and say new layer. I like to call this layer trace. And I'll shut my caps lock off. I'll turn it trace, and I'm going to select a color that is not on my screen. I'm going to use green for this trace layer, and I'm going to double click that and make that my current layer. So everything I'm drawing now is going to be on a layer called trace. And so what I've done is I'm going to take the data that was here. I don't want to destroy this data. I don't want to start moving it around. Like, I don't want to grab this point and say, you know what, that should be over here, because really this is what was recorded from the laser data. I don't want to destroy that. But what I am going to do is I am going to start a layer called trace, and I'm going to use this data. I'm going to say, you know what, from this endpoint, and we're going to go over to this endpoint, and we're going to come up over here to this endpoint here, and I'm going to start tracing this out a little bit. And I'm going to come up to the very bow of the boat up here. I'm going to maybe even grab a window, and I'm going to say, you know what, I want a line from, I'm going to say that front line right there, and I'm going to come down to the endpoint, and the endpoint right here, and I'm going to go down and I'm going to grab, and really when I've got a situation like this where I've got several points coming together, I'm going to pick something about in the middle. Let's see. Actually, that looks like a really good point to me. You know, and sometimes we're talking about something so close here that it's maybe just a 1/16 of an inch off or something. So that looks pretty good there. So let's come around and swing over to the other side here. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the polyline command or line command, either one you want to use. And I'm going to grab the endpoint of that green line. I'm going to come up to the endpoint of this one. I'm going to come down here to the endpoint of this one. And again, I'm going to come down here. And I'm going to try to get, again, use about the same point that I chose before. I chose that blue line right there. And what that allows me to do now is to actually, I'm going to grab a line from the end of that green line to the endpoint of this green line. Okay. All right, let's continue. Let's continue on the boat. I've got several pieces selected here. Let's go to this back section here. I'm going to choose the line command or polyline command, and I'm going to grab that point back to. Now at this point here, I'm not sure. This is a little bit difficult. If I had a picture of what's going on, I'm going to choose, I think, this this outer edge here. Usually it's on a cover situation. You're better off to go to the outermost point. So I'm going to choose this point. I'm going to come over here to this point here, and let's come back to the endpoint. Let's go from that endpoint down. Let's go out to this outermost point, and then we can follow the laser data up. Again, over here, let's arrow, or let's get around a little bit. Let's follow that laser data up. Let's come over to the back of the green side here. And I think right here I've actually grabbed the wrong point, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to use my curve point control points, and we'll take that back over to the back side over here. From here, let's go ahead, let's turn the control points off. Let's grab the line command, we'll grab from here to this corner, back up to those. Now, what's pretty good is I've got this, let's go up to the bow up here in the front. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the line command, I'm going to grab from the endpoint of my green line, and let's go down to the and on this situation here, I'm going to go to this intersection right here. That looks like a good average between those 2 points. Okay. All right. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start tracing out, and I'm going to clean up these curved lines here. And the curved lines here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use something here called, I'm going to click and hold on my curve points, and I'm going to come down here to curve interpolate points. Let's start at the common bow line, which is my green line here. For this, I am going to turn on the nearest O snap. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working my way down, and I'm going to start following this line. And you'll notice if I just come down and I grab about every 16 inches, 18 inches along that line, and this looks like the rub rail line on the boat, I'm going to come down and I'm going to continue on, and then at the end I'm going to come down here and grab the end point of this. And what that's done is you're going to see it's giving me a really good representation. You know, I might be off a little bit here, but it looks like it's cleaned it up quite nicely and gives me a really good representation of the bow line there. All right, same thing on the bottom. In curve interpolate points, I'm going to grab the end point of the green line, and I'm going to start grabbing a few of the... Now, a lot of times on this, the actual points that were taken are the high points on this, and so I'm going to start grabbing quite a few of the end points if I can. Again, about every 16, 18 inches along that line until you get back to the end point, and done. Okay, that side looks good. Let's go back over to the other side here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to grab the end point, and I see right now I actually snapped to one of the incorrect points there. We're going to change that in just a moment. I'm going to start following my rub rail. And again, I'm not changing the laser data that was taken. What I am doing is using it. Okay. Let's come here, and it looks like my first line, I've selected that. Let's turn the control points on. What's really great about Rhino is if you do something like grab the wrong line, it's very easy to correct that. I can just turn control points on and grab that line. Okay. All right, and for the bottom, I'm going to go to curve, interpolate points. I'm going to grab the endpoint here, and again, using most of the high points here, like where maybe the laser was shot, I'll grab about every 16 inches along that and come to the endpoint. All right, so at this point, here's what it looks like I've got. It looks like I've got most of the data captured. What I'm going to do is if I come in and start turning off some other layers that we had, and you'll see that I have a pretty good representation now of the boat, and it's pretty much cleaned up. Pretty much got a wireframe cleanup. Now, the one thing I am going to do is I'm going to add a couple of additional pieces here. I'm going to add a line from here down, and instead of nearest, I am going to turn on something called perpendicular. And what perpendicular is going to be is just straight down. It's a straight perpendicular shot from here down. Let's grab a couple of these lines perpendicular. And what this is going to allow me to do, this is going to give me a little bit of extra detail in order to put my meshes in. Perpendicular and perpendicular. So, all right. So at this point, what I've got here is I have a cleaned up wireframe boat. All of my original data is still right here. If I turn the layers back on, you can see here's all the original data. But right now I can shut those off and just work with this layer called trace. And I am ready now at this point to start using this for some MPanel tools. All right, I've started MPanel-Production, and I'm using MPanel-Production 6.0. And what I want to do here is if I come in and start talking about how I'm going to apply a mesh to this, I need to start thinking about the zones and the areas that I'm going to deal with. Typically, you'd want a mesh that's not too dense, but not too light either. And the thing is, we've got these areas like this long area right here. Now, if I start looking at some of this data, I can see that that point right there, that's actually, I used a polyline command on that. I'm going to choose a split command. I'm going to select this other line because I want these to be individual lines. Same for here, for this one here. I'm going to choose split, and I'm going to choose these two perpendicular lines. And now that is 3 lines. Same thing over here. Split with those two. And so now I've got 3 lines here. Okay. I'm going to do the same thing for the rub rail, but first I actually need to apply the mesh on the bottom here. Now, the one thing I'm going to do here is, because I'm going to put this on this direction, this is going to be my bottom, right, top, and left. I'm going to choose the bottom here, and I'm going to say 37. I'm going to put a few more mesh points on the bottom. And so I'm going to say I want to add a mesh between 2, 3, or 4 edges. I click Add Mesh, choose the bottom, right, top, and come back over to the left side. All right, poor connectivity between top and right edges. That's telling me that between the top and the right edges, ignore the gap, say no. And if I zoom in here, I can see right there that this line didn't quite get all the way back. So MPanel is going to tell me if there's a problem. I can grab it, snap it right to the endpoint, right click to shut those off, and I'm good. Let's come over here and look. I think I'm good on this side. I'll zoom in a little bit just to make sure I didn't make that same mistake. And actually, I did make a mistake. Right here, I can see that that line should be snapped down to the endpoint. All right, let's shut those off. So occasionally, we are going to have some points that need to be corrected. Not a big deal. It's easy enough just to grab that control points on, left click that, go over, fix it, come back and right click it to shut it off. All right, again, bottom, right, top, and left hand side. Looks good. Let's swing around to the other side. Okay, and at this point we'll do the same thing. We'll choose the bottom. This time the right is the bow line, top is the rub rail, and again I've got this part back here. Say no. I didn't check this before. I'm going to say let's split this. Use the split command. Let's choose the rub rail and this back line right here. And so now those are independent pieces. All right, now I can click Add Mesh, bottom, right, and I'm going to choose the line. Top is the rub rail, left is this side. All right, so now that I've actually used that, here's what I can do is I can select that line now, say split, and now I can use those same perpendicular lines so that now that same rub rail I just used, and we'll do the same thing on both sides. I'll select the rub rail, I'll choose split, I'll choose both those vertical lines, and now that rub rail, you know, I wanted it one piece for the bottom here. I don't want it one piece for the next lines. All right. So let's work around the boat a little bit here. I'm going to change back now, and I'm actually going to say 25 by 25 here. Get everything pretty much roughly to a uniform point. I'm going to say Add Mesh. The reason I use 37 here is because that's a longer run. I wanted more points on that. I'm going to say bottom, right, top, and left. Let's swing around. Let's do the back side. Bottom, right, top, and left. So let's click on Add Mesh. I'm going to say bottom. I'm going to say right. Now, this comes to a point, so I don't have a top. I click Enter to say 0 for the, or none for the top. Pick the left side. And that option was here, Enter to skip the edge. All right. Notice I'm rotating the boat so that I can kind of see all the edges. Bottom, right, top, and left. And this one here, I'm going to say bottom, right, no top, and left. Let's do these last two pieces on here. So here in just a few minutes, what we've done is we've completely cleaned the boat up, and we've wireframe meshed it. Now at this point, I've got a couple of things. Number one is I know that probably up here, these lines do not exist. These are just lines that were taken. So there's a couple areas on the boat here that I think need to be adjusted, and adjusted by adding tension. If you take a look at the boat and say go to, let's say, a rendered view, you're going to see that I've actually got a hard line right here. And I think all three of these pieces, really what needs to happen is this. I'm going to choose these three meshes here. 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to go to Utility Tools. I'm going to choose Join Meshes, and I'm going to say Modify. They go to red. I'm going to say delete the old. And that now, if I choose on that, that's one mesh. Okay. Let's do the same thing on the back side here. Make sure I can see all those meshes. I'm going to hold the Shift key down, choose all three of those, and say Modify, Join, delete the old. Alright, so I've got a single mesh here and a single mesh up front. I'm going to click on the front. I'm going to go back to Add Meshes. I'm going to go to Tension Mesh. I've got this set to about 0.1. And what that means is I'm pulling 90% of my tension in the warp direction and only about 10% across it. Okay? And so what I'm going to do is I select that mesh and click Tension to Mesh. It's going to run through its algorithms, and here's what's happened. You can actually see, if you take a look at it, it's actually taken and it's going to dip that fabric down. If I click Delete Old, you'll actually see now that and that's the true thing that shape's going to be. So that actually creates the shape up to that T-top that I really want. Okay, let's do the same thing on the back. I click on the mesh. I click Tension to Mesh. And again, click Delete Old. And if I go now to a rendered view, I think you really get a good view for the shaping that imparts. And that's really where the cover is going to shine. It's going to make it look great. So anywhere it's not supported, like from the rub rail down, we don't need to do it. Pretty much from a T-top down in this area on this mesh, we don't need to relax that either, because that's actually, an area that's shaped in really nicely. Let me minimize this for a second. And so what you can see is that anywhere, like from a rub rail down, where it's not supported, we don't need to do that. But anywhere like behind the T-top or in front of the T-top, anywhere there's not that hard line, where there's not a piece of frame, the fabric's going to be allowed to sink down on that. You're going to be able to create a cover that's going to look really almost like shrink wrap. It's going to be really nice. And I think you'll agree that's going to be a really, really sharp piece. That's how I would mesh this boat, and first clean it up. Cleaned up all the wireframe using the trace layer and created it, and then apply the meshes to the boat to create this. The next step is you can just start to use the MPanel-Production tool, the paneling tool, to create panels from each of these meshes, and take it from there.